Coming up, Day'ron Sharpe went down with a knee injury against the Portland Trailblazers. While they may have avoided severity, it certainly will change the short-term outlook for this roster and rotation. We break down the impact and update coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. Over there is Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Armbeck. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know, today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on to get started. And Doug, we start with injury updates around one Day'ron Sharpe, and not surprisingly, it still remains a little vague ultimately what this is going to look like, but at a minimum, it seems to be less severe than the visuals may have made it feel against Portland.
For sure. Nets headed to Europe here for the Paris game on Thursday, per Eric Slater over at Clutch Points. Day'ron Sharpe suffered a knee sprain, and he's getting an MRI. As of this recording, the results of the MRI have not been released. I think there's a belief that it's not super severe, like you mentioned at the beginning, and especially like we saw during the game, right? Like he comes down hard and very awkwardly. It looks like the knee sort of hyperextends, bends all the way back. He's clearly in discomfort. The trainers sprint onto the court. Essentially, it seems to be like, hey, stop moving, right? Like, don't move anymore. Don't put pressure on it. And they help him off. So still waiting on it. It does feel like we maybe have avoided like the surgery thing. We're still going to wait on the MRI. I will say the Nets social did, this is not Day'ron Sharpe related, but they did something after the game where the players were walking through the tunnel and they were sort of handing stuff out. They were handing flowers out. And Sharpe does go by where he is in what I would, something of like a walker, like an assistance walker, it looks like, the ones that have wheels on that you kind of like lean your leg on and then you walk. That's what it looked like it was in. That's not an official thing. But so I think that's where we are. The hope now is that they avoided catastrophic injury or, long-term being out, but we'll have to wait. We'll have to wait for further full confirmation on that. I would expect him to miss some time at least.
Yeah, it's funny too. Funny is the wrong way to phrase this. It's ironic, I think, that Day'ron Sharpe, who is developing, who is coming on this year, right? Finally taking that next step forward. They've made adjustments to the type of scheme they run to benefit and create more opportunities for him to be on the court. It almost seems like this is what had to happen this season. If not Day'ron Sharpe, somebody had to go down with another injury, because when you go back and we think about the depth, obviously Ben Simmons, he's kind of his own isolated situation, but Cameron Johnson starts out the season with a little bit of an injury. Then you feel like, oh, the depth is a strength of this roster. Well, there goes Dennis Smith Jr. for a little bit. There goes Lonnie Walker for a little bit. And when you're in the middle of this run for the Nets where they've lost 11 out of their last 14 games, including the 2 wins against the Detroit Pistons, it's like, I don't know about for you, but this felt like, and the hits just keep coming. You're just trying to hold on here right now. And Day'ron Sharpe is a critical part of that with how well he's been playing over the season.
Yeah, I guess I don't have that same sort of like, I don't know if it's like nihilism, but like I don't have that same doom and gloom feeling. Only because I just feel like every team goes through this, and I'm more insulated to it just a little bit, just from like looking at every single team every single night with every single set of minutes and being like, this just happens to every team. Like every team has guys hurt now for long periods. Because like my mind instantly went to Cleveland, where it's like, oh, we're going to lose Garland and Mobley. I mean, these critical dudes, and they kind of just keep chugging along. So I guess like my feeling is I don't want to fall into a trap. I know for sure why you're saying it. So it's not like, it's not abnormal, but I don't want to fall into the trap of, oh, of course, always us. Because I just do think this kind of stuff happens. I know I'm overstating what you said. I don't think it's real. Go ahead.
And it is good. It's good, like clarifying from you, right? Look at some other teams and some far higher profile names that have gone down with injuries this season and have already been confirmed to be much more substantial injuries, ones that are going to impact their outlook. Maybe even I should just keep it specific to Day'ron. it's just so disheartening that a player
Yes.
finally taking that next step where you go, hey, this makes us think about him differently, makes us think about the future differently at that position. And he goes down. Hopefully it isn't long term, but then all of a sudden you have to pump the brakes on, oh, well, what were we thinking here? What were the expectations? Because what is true, I think, about a lot of players in the NBA is once the first injury happens, then you go, well, now I need you back and healthy, and nothing can happen for a while. Otherwise, you start to get looked at as a guy who maybe has a hard time staying on the court.
Yeah, and for sure, like that part where it's, he's definitely taken a leap here, right? He has been probably one of, if not the biggest surprise on the team this whole year in like sort of like the quality minutes that the Nets are getting out of him. He has right now the highest net rating on the team at set plus 7.7, right? Like that's easily the highest too. It's 7.7 for him. Wofford at plus 5 fewer minutes. Lonnie Walker plus 4.3 fewer overall minutes because he missed a ton of time. And literally every single other guy in the Nets is in the negative, right? Those are the only 3 guys with positive net ratings. And yeah, some of it's a byproduct of facing other teams' second units and probably beating up a little bit on those guys. But it's also just a product of him just getting a lot better. Like he's just gotten a ton better this season. He's way more confident around the basket. The rebounding is completely elite. Them playing the drop coverage suits his skills much better, just in terms of overall defense. And he's been the guy for the first time in a long time. Well, 2 things. One, he was so good that he had people stop for a moment asking about Harry Giles. No small feat.
It was brief, right, but they did it. He did it,
I mean,
though.
Literally that good. But also, starting to say like, hey, maybe Nick Claxton isn't as critical to the future as we thought he was. Maybe not too long ago, right?
Yeah.
In terms of overall center minutes. That's not a knock on Nick Claxton, by the way. Like for sure, it's just a matter of seeing that there might be a cheaper replacement,
right?
And Sharpe has played that well to actually entertain the conversation.
Yeah, having more quality players on the roster just means you have more avenues for how you want to build your team out going forward. Coming up here in a second, we'll talk about short-term roster impact. Is Giles the new name on Brooklyn Nets fans' lips, or will the Nets go with an old tried and true small ball fashion? We'll get into that in just one moment.
All right, before we get into that, tell you about our friends over at BetterHelp. That's because this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. Around New Year's, we're always getting obsessed with how to change ourselves. Instead of just already expanding on what we're doing right, we're doing a ton right out there. It's time to find those things, the positives in your life, and just kind of really start to highlight them. Maybe you get organized in one part of your space, you want to tackle another, or you're taking supplements every morning. You want to make sure you're just getting up and eating actual breakfast too. Therapy helps you find those strengths so you can ditch the extreme resolutions, make changes that really stick. If you're thinking of starting therapy, you have to give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient, flexible, totally suited to your schedule too. All you got to do to get started on BetterHelp, you fill out a brief questionnaire, you get matched with a licensed therapist, you switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. They want to find someone who works with you and for you. Celebrate the progress you've already made. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOnNBA.
All right, so as we continue our off-day injury update around one Day'ron Sharpe, knee sprain as of right now. MRI at the time of this recording coming. So it seems like the Nets and Day'ron Sharpe may have dodged a more serious injury, but we'll wait to get that official update and obviously bring it to you right here on Locked On Nets. The other part of this then is in the short term, as Brooklyn prepares to take their flight over to Paris and play against the Cavs, and maybe thankfully this comes at a time when they're not playing a ton of basketball games, so that's a good thing in terms of Day'Ron's recovery timeline. Before we talk about how they get into the rotation and missing his minutes, it's worth noting, as we said, coming into his own, taking that next step. 37 games this season, only started one, but 16 minutes on average, which is a big bump up from 12, 11 over the first 2 years of his career. He's a guy that's done a great job, as we know, on the boards, grabbing down 7 rebounds per game to go along with 7.5 points. The blocks averaging nearly 1 per game as well.
Can I make real quick before you move on? I want to say one thing about the rebounding too, just to put it in context.
Yes.
So those numbers, 7 rebounds a game doesn't sound like a lot. It's a ton when it's only 16 minutes per game.
Yes.
And if you just back it out and just go rebounds per minute, right? So which is a better way to look at like just the overall impact. He's actually fourth in the entire NBA in defensive rebounds per minute, behind only Andre Drummond, Clint Capella, and Mitchell Robinson, who's obviously lost for the season. And then on the offensive end, I just had a resort. Yeah, he's fourth overall on the offensive end as well. I mean, like when I said elite rebounding, I just wanted to contextualize it because like seven doesn't sound like a ton. If you played 26 minutes a game, like these would be a massive rebound numbers. He just doesn't 100%. Play that much. So anyway, just sorry to cut you off, but I wanted to just put that in a little context.
And I knew that there's that layer deeper when you get inside the numbers that way. And also, incidentally, over the last 10 games, he's scored in double digits, 8 of those contests. He also has 3 double-doubles across that time span as well. So there have been high-impact games when he's given you big, going back into December. You talk about having 10 rebounds and 13 points, 15 and 9 even. It's just 11 and 11 against, that was the Detroit game, but we still count those no matter what. They were wins, and they were also big statistical nights. It's just you need that. Because we've also talked about Nicholas Claxton and his physicality, his size, right? And what you sometimes lack. Being able to lean on Day'Ron for quality bench minutes has been important. So that being the case, now when we look at this roster, we know some segment, you'll be in the comments, we want to hear from you, are going to say, well, now it's time for Giles to take center stage. What do you think is more likely here? A very buried Giles who's been on the bench but has not seen minutes, even in garbage games, will start to get a role here because there's a little bit of a 1-to-1-ish kind of scenario? Or will the Nets go with what they've done historically in recent years, small ball lineups, Dorian Finney-Smith, more Trendon Watford, and try to stay maybe a little more athletic?
Yeah, I think it's going to be the second thing. I just don't think we've seen any sign that Giles is now they kept him, right? So like they kept him and didn't put him on waivers like they did with Armani Brooks. So that's a good sign, but they just haven't shown a single other sign that like they have any interest in doing this. Like there's literally been no scenario outside of epic blowouts that he gets on the court, right? So he gets the blowout run for sure. But even the game where they punted against Milwaukee, where kind of everyone got to play, even then he didn't play. Yeah. Really. And so I just like don't see it with Giles. I don't think we can wish cast that really anymore. And I know other people want to do that more than we've really done overall. I think what they end up doing is like what you said at the beginning, some small ball stuff with DFS at the 5, Trendon Watford. I think they're probably holding out hope. I mean, Simmons is, I hate to even say this, but Ben Simmons is traveling to Europe. And so there's probably something where he is closer. Like he's traveling with the team so he can continue to get like 2-on-2s and 3-on-3s going. That's like the specific, I feel that's not, I don't think it's 100% reported, but I think you can read the tea leaves about like that, why that's happening. And so maybe you feel like you buy a few minutes there. I think that's the plan. I just don't think that the Giles thing, we just haven't seen any evidence of it. And I think that like saying you want it to happen, they just would have done it. There have been opportunities to have him play, and they have not taken those opportunities. So I just don't think that's going to be the case. Maybe even Clowney we see first. I just don't think it's going to be what happens.
And 10 games so far this season for Giles, just to drill down on it, averaging 6 minutes in the games.
But those are all blowouts. Like every single one of those things is just it was like a brief minute, like real rotation minutes in that Bucks game, but it was like really nothing. So and that's the only one that wasn't just total garbage time blowout.
And I think the other part of it too, just in terms of at least what it seems like the fans' perception of him is, regards to whatever level. Well, you'll get him in, he can rebound, but he also he'll space the floor for you, like he'll help you in that avenue. That's also dreaming on something. I'm not even trying to put him down. That's dreaming on a guy that's never really taken 3-point shots, and even in garbage time, which is sometimes when you get the inflated numbers in some categories, he's hitting 14% this season on the attempts that he's had. Like I think that there is this world where it's 7 attempts, by the way. It's just this world where I think you dream on the thing that's going to work out for you because it's probably never actually going to be tried, right? So you can always speculate, well, if Giles just played more, it would be X, Y, or Z. There's also a reason why certain guys never see that minutes increase. And it's actually why you mentioned a guy like Moore Watford, as I said, the likelier of the scenarios. Well, Watford has shown you, and he already had a bigger sample size in Portland. Then he gets here, and incrementally you see his skill set, right? His style of play. It's deserving of more minutes, and you're going to see him continue to push for that. Giles hasn't accomplished that in any form or fashion to this point of the season. The other question that I think here, maybe before we
can I ask you real quick? Yeah. We said what has happened and what we believe has happened. I want to be clear. I don't think we said like what we want to happen. I actually wouldn't mind having him play. I just don't think it's realistic. That's the only. I just want to clarify one thing. Like, does that make sense? I don't know if you agree with that. Like, would you just rather see him play? I'm not actually totally sure why he's on the team, to be honest. Right?
Well, no, and this is we've done this several times in several situations for Brooklyn, right? Like what we think should happen, could happen, or will happen. And when it comes to Giles, just as you mentioned it there, I don't entirely know why he's here. Because if you haven't utilized them at all, then whether it is, you mentioned a name, right? Like Noah Clowney, or whether it is going small ball and playing more X, Y, or Z. I don't know who it is. Some people have even said, well, Johnson should be up from the G League because he gives you some backcourt value when you were struggling there. Even as a sample size, 21 years old. I can make a lot of cases for a lot of guys that should have been up on the roster instead of Giles for the simple fact that we've seen them go deep into it. Armani Brooks gets waived by the team. It doesn't really change my perspective one way or the other, but they were playing him in real minutes in games that mattered when other injuries happened. So, no, it's informed by the fact that the team hasn't seemed to utilize him. I'd be fine if they played him. And I also don't know if that's the best version of this team, right? If you're not going to have Day'Ron Sharpe for a limited run here, I don't know if introducing a guy that hasn't been playing versus leaning a little more heavily on the Trendon Watfords, the Dorian Finney-Smiths, guys that have played, have been in the rotation, and have some level of connectivity with other guys on the roster. That being said, I will also note that we have been a proponent of trying different things. We think that Jacques Vaughn should try more rotations and try different combinations. So he's on the roster. If you would use them at all to this point, I might say he will be used now. It just doesn't seem likely.
Yeah. Sorry, I just wanted to sure we are on the right side of clarity there, because it's mostly like a prediction about based on just past events that could for sure change. I'm happy that he's getting paid and he's on the team, by the way. It's like all good. Right. It's just that sometimes there is a chasm between what we think should happen and what is actually happening and what their actual plan is.
In a second here, we're going to talk about Noah Clowney. We're going to talk about Jalen Wilson, that I want to discuss that angle as well. Even Dariq Whitehead, plus whether or not the current solution to missing Day'Ron Sharpe is on the roster or will inspire Sean Marks to look outside. We'll talk about that in just 1 second.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. The NFL regular season's wrapping up. Playoffs about to get underway. No better time to get in on the action over on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We've been telling you about this deal. It's time to get on this. $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That $5 bet, win or lose, by the way, and you're going to grab the $150 in bonus bets. You can use those bonus bucks on everything. Live same game parlays. They have an explore tab so you can figure out all the different bets other people are making. Make a parlay in the parlay hub. It's the best way to find popular parlays. So much more. They got the player props. They drill it down really, really fine for every single game over on FanDuel, NBA, and NFL. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
All right, so as we tie a bow on not only the injury update around Day'Ron Sharpe, what feels like should be a shorter than longer timeline for his return, depending on what it's going to look like. And also, though, what does it look like for this team replacing him in the short term? One thing that you just mentioned there in the last about Giles, I think it applies here now, too. What do you think they'll do if we say, well, it's going to be Dorian Finney-Smith and Trendon Watford? Let's start there. Do you think that it changes how they work rotations in that regard? As in, do you want to keep Dorian Finney-Smith away from Nicholas Claxton because you're going small ball, so you're going to put him into the second unit and keep him there, and then maybe you thrust someone else, Trendon Watford or otherwise, up the roster because you want to maintain balance? And it does look different if you don't have Day'Ron.
Yeah, it's funny. I do think what we probably end up seeing. So like DFS is usually like the second wave of subs, right? That comes out in the game. And that's usually like, signals, Royce O'Neal kind of coming in, and in the last game, it was DSJ that came in. And then ultimately Day'Ron comes in like 2 minutes later. I mean, that's typically what they've been doing. That comes in for Claxton. I think we maybe see DFS stay a little bit longer in those games. Maybe Claxton comes out earlier, right? To like save him. And then so they keep DFS in and then bring him back, like kind of stagger that a little bit. I think we could definitely see that. I think for sure we see more Watford. I mean, you mentioned yesterday that Watford kind of got in right at the end of the game. I'm not sure like how much of that was just sort of Hail Mary, get the guy in because, we need something on defense. But it was interesting that he at least came in. I think that's
And that was
probably
when
the way
Dennis
they
Smith
go.
Jr. exited with 6 fouls, just the clarity.
Oh, sorry. Right. Okay, well, still, regardless, I mean, the point remains the same. They
Yep.
did. They have played Watford at DFS some this year, 104 minutes together. So they have leaned that way at times to try to get like sort of extra length into the lineup. And that's one of those ones. It's like, hey, we don't have a center, but we have 2 guys that are big, and maybe that's enough. Maybe that's like makes 75% of a center or something like that when they're paired together. I think that's probably going to be the way they lean. I'm not like too opposed to it overall if that's the way they go. It's a slightly different look. You hope that maybe what you lose on the glass you make up for in just generating some steals, which the Nets have really struggled with this season. So maybe that's the trade-off with lineups like that. You maybe can get out in transition a little bit more. And maybe they just run more switching, right? Like they've been talking about how they've been married. Jacques Vaughn had some interesting, had more head scratching quotes really about the defensive schemes.
Another episode on that one.
I mean, my goodness, it's like this is a whole other episode, so we can wait on this. But the cliff notes on this one were like, maybe we need to evaluate that we haven't. We're going to switch up the schemes a little bit. It's like, hey, you're allowed to do different things. Like you don't have to sign a contract at the beginning of the season. It's like, oh, if we play drop, we're fine. If we don't play drop, we're fine. Like, so maybe we see some more switching. I'd be all for that also. I think it's just going to lend itself to maybe just some different looks, but I don't think it's going to be the Giles stuff.
Just be sure to follow us, because one of these episodes coming up is going to also be that Jacques Vaughn intimated that and some players can't play certain systems and different schemes and skill sets. So he also, once again, kind of put it a little bit on the players' feet of some of them just aren't versatile enough to do different things when we need them to do it. So there's a lot of interesting stuff coming, and that'll be for another.
And by the way, just as a little tease here, Bridges had a specific sort of, I don't want to call it a counter, but it was hey, when all we do is play drop and protect the boards, we're going to give up threes. I mean, there's been like not amazing rhetoric coming out of this place around
Jacques Vaughn, you pick
things that would signal that not everyone is on the same page with the plan. Now, I get it. When you lose all your games, everyone's just going to be in a bad way. Like it's hard to be Johnny positive when you just get freaking dumpstered by the good teams and the bad ones. But it also, there might be some cracks forming here in like if everyone's seeing the same things, because there's increasing evidence that might not be the way.
Now, there's what I would like to see them do in the short term without Day'Ron Sharpe that I do want to mention here. But the other thing that I just want to briefly touch on, mostly because I think we'll be on the same page, is let's say there's a world where Day'Ron is going to miss a little bit of time, significant enough that the organization says, well, now we've really lost something, and Giles is not going to be the answer for us, and we can't go small ball like that forever. Because the signal has been that the Nets and Sean Marks are not going to throw in the towel on this season and start trading off pieces, do you think that losing Day'Ron for any amount of time would change their approach to the trade deadline and saying, hey, if there's a margin guy, if we can get a body in here that crashes the glass, it's probably behooves us to do it so that we have some one-to-one replacement?
Oh God, I hope they don't. I mean, like I at that point, I would rather just be like, let's just see what Noah Clowney can do.
Okay,
right?
So let's pivot right to that, because that's what I think they should do in the short term, and then even the long term. It's bring up the kids and let's go here. Let's go with the youth, right?
Yeah, like if there's just an opening and you need a live body and you drafted this guy 22nd or whatever you ended up drafting, 21st, 22nd. Like, yeah, at some point, it's clear they don't want to play these guys either. So but at some point, if your hand is forced, it would be a head slapping moment to me if they were to go out and do this. I'm very worried by this. Worried. I'm basketball fan worried, not like real life worried.
Not like life-changing moment worried.
But I am. This next month is going to be so important, really, for like how the team views itself in terms of how they trade some of these guys, what they think they want to do, how important the play-in game is. And if Sharpe was going to miss extended time, that really would. I'm glad you brought it up, because that really would highlight something that they might want to do that would be very short-sighted. Yes. Right. So which would be like, use an asset to bring in a big body.
Right.
I'd just rather see Clowney
in a season when you really should never have a point that you reach panic. Right. That's not what this season should be. And a move like that would be like reactionary, saying we're going to lose something if we don't make a move. Like there's nothing really to be lost per se this year.
And really one of the things that makes it such a bummer, and part of it's by just design. They have lots of good NBA rotation guys, and it's hard to find minutes. these are really good situations to play younger players in, because it's not just, if you look back at some of these younger teams like, Detroit maybe, or like Houston before this iteration of them, before when it was like, hey, we're going to roll the balls out, we'll see what happens.
Right.
Like the Nets actually aren't like that. They're not playing great, but they have real veterans that you could probably learn a lot from by playing with. Like playing guys like Clowney and Derek and guys like this with DFS and Royce O'Neal and Spencer Dinwiddie, even for all their flaws or like they're not high ceilings, these guys are like good, respected NBA professionals who take it really seriously. And you would love for the young guys to be able to play with these guys.
Yeah.
And that's actually what makes it even more disappointing that they don't. It's like, because you might not get another chance at this. And getting good veteran sort of guidance through game situations should be what the Nets are sort of prioritizing. They're not at all, ever, seems like. But it feels like this would be, you'd be gifted, you would be given a situation where you could do that. I just don't, again, I have no confidence that they're going to do it, because they don't do it. So there's no, how could anyone have confidence that they're going to do it?
Yeah. And it's, for me, it's the short term. We talked about this big picture as well, but remember, as you said, you waived Armani Brooks, so you had a roster spot there. If you're not going to use Giles, there should be a roster spot there. It's Noah Clowney. You mentioned even Whitehead and Jalen Wilson, a guy that, again, the other side of this is a player that you drafted who was already 23 years old and shown you something when he's been on the court. Great opportunity. Even if it is a short-term injury for Day'Ron Sharpe, we decided over these next 3 games that Day'Ron missed to see if we have something in a couple of these young guys worth looking into over the second half of the season. More than likely, it feels like they'll go the other way and they'll lean heavy on the veterans. And that's a frustration point. On top of maybe losing Day'Ron for a little bit of time here, it's just this lack of conviction. You had conviction enough to take these players in the draft, but not enough conviction to say, we want to try to give them this taste here incrementally as we work our way through the season.
And by the way, last one for me on this, I know we went from Day'Ron Sharpe to the young guys, but it makes sense. You can see why they're connected. This isn't just about these guys. They've never wanted to do this. Like
right.
With Vaughn, it's always been like this. You couldn't get Cam Thomas onto the court, right? You can't get these guys onto the court. It's not like just these guys. We've seen this time and time again, where there's a total unwillingness to play some of these younger players. And if we had lots of things to draw on in situations where it's like, oh, it was this guy, but they just haven't had that. And when you don't have it, you can't assume it's just going to start. So these are the areas of frustration more than anything. It's like, we just have to, at this point, just have to see it. Like, and they just haven't gone that direction.
And so for me to tie it back to the top and Day'Ron Sharpe, sprained knee at this point, going for an MRI. We'll update it, obviously, as those results come along the way. Not right now expected to go to Paris with the team, but all of these things remain up in the air until it gets finalized. You said it. Now, there was a superstar era once upon a time here. You guys may have forgot about it with the Brooklyn Nets and Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving and James Harden. I wasn't talking about the Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce era. Day'Ron Sharpe, you could maybe make the case, too, that he played in 80 games over his first 2 seasons and only had 11 combined starts and only averaged 11, 12 minutes. Now, we saw in sample sizes why it was hard sometimes to get him there, but I think it just clarifies that perspective, right? Yes, it's going to look bad sometimes, but you don't get better until you're given the chance to get better. And some of it feels like this season for Day'Ron was like, well, now that he's getting consistent minutes and now that they've done a little bit of a scheme adjustment to kind of help what his skill set is, all of a sudden he flourishes, right? So you'd like to see that from this team overall and use these moments. Guy goes down with injury, use it as the excuse to test the waters on something different. Nets haven't done it to this point. Hopefully they make a little bit of a different path forward, but there's a lot more than just the Day'Ron injury to cover here in the coming days.
All right, we're going to get out of here. Much appreciate everyone over on YouTube, everyone listening to the podcast. Remember, we're coming at you every single weekday covering the Brooklyn Nets. And someone got on me about covering it every day. We said every day. It's not every day. It's every weekday. That's good. Those are the real days of the week. We're all off on the weekends. And then sometimes on the weekends with the live after the game stuff too. So yeah, that's what we're doing for you every single day. Totally free. All you got to do is subscribe over on YouTube, subscribe wherever you listen to the podcast for Locked On Nets.
Heard Jock Vaughn say this when discussing the lineup. Old age and treachery will always beat youth and exuberance. That's David Mamet.
Oh, one of the all-time great poets and playwrights. We will be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.